My name is Dr. Mark Joseph O'Connell, and this is my Seneca Pride Month 2025 lecture, Lilac Time at the Rodeo, Stories of Identity, AIDS, and Fashion. And happy Pride. Once again, my name is Dr. Mark Joseph O'Connell, and I'm an artist, a writer, and a fashion academic at Seneca Polytechnic in Toronto, Canada. I have spent much of my career studying the intersections of fashion, identity, and memory. My monograph, Canadian Fashion Economies, will be published by Bloomsbury, UK this October. Before I begin my talk, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat First Nations. I also want to acknowledge the deep importance of community, especially queer community, and how wonderful it is to come together in celebration, remembrance, and visibility during Pride Month. Hello to Seneca Prouder, our queer faculty and student organization. Hello to the Office of Reconciliation and Inclusion, who are sponsoring this talk. And hello to all the allies. Of course, hello to the stars of the show, my fellow Seneca queers. I'm talking today about my book, Lilac Time at the Rodeo, Stories of Identity, AIDS, and Fashion, a mashup of history and personal reflection that weaves together stories of creativity, fashion, and AIDS. The book is a remembrance of lives that shone brightly and often too briefly. It is a celebration of fierce style, incandescent lives, and creative brilliance, as well as a reclamation of space and remembrance for those whose names history has since tried to forget. The idea for Lilac Time at the Rodeo did not emerge as a neatly constructed academic thesis or a long-conceived literary project. It came, quite frankly, out of grief, memory, and an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. It began during the COVID-19 pandemic, a moment when the world was collectively holding its breath, navigating confusion, fear, isolation, and loss. I found myself watching Dr. Anthony Fauci, who had gone to college with my father, on the news, night after night, and with every panicked briefing, every contradictory headline, every whisper of conspiracy or transmission panic. It brought back a lot of memories, bad memories from a different time, and a visceral re-engagement with an earlier pandemic, AIDS. Fauci had even been the government spokesman then as well. Truly déjà vu of the worst sort. The fevered discussions around how to protect oneself, the shifting understandings regarding transmission, the barrage of contradictory messaging, the conspiracy theories, the lies, the fevered paranoid whispers of a disease that was manufactured in a government lab. It was also familiar to me during COVID because it was all part of public discourse in the early 1990s. During lockdown, I was transported back to the early 90s. I was 20 when I came out as a gay man in 1990, the same age as many of my students are now. I love my students and can't imagine them having to navigate that awful time. The death and dying from the first wave of AIDS were at their peak. My friends, my friends' parents, boys I knew from high school, from the art world, from the dance world, my lovers, they were all getting sick and dying. It was probably the greatest loss of life of young people in a population outside of wartime. It was inconceivable, but it happened. A lot was resurfacing that needed examination. And as a reflective researcher, I saw an opportunity to put in practice some of the arts-based methodologies I had been reading about. Regarding my research methods, my background is in visual art and design. Therefore, I usually engage with a subject first by drawing, then I will do the writing, and it grows organically from there. I was doing a lot of reading of old favorites like Henry James, Cynthia Ozick, Hilton Als, and Susan Sontag. So the literary essay was also on my mind. It seemed like an ideal form for what I was pondering. The subjects of this book, and my subsequent rodeo books, are queer fashion and art practitioners. These people, because of the stigma attached to their illness, were never properly eulogized. Chester Weinberg, Halston, Scott Barry, and Wei Bandy, who I will be talking about today, as well as Patrick Kelly, David Wojnarowicz, Tina Chow, Hibiscus and the Coquettes, Antonio Lopez, Marie Debris, and Sylvester, and so many others. Bright, brilliant, and visionary all, the loss of these people to AIDS was devastating. This book is for them, and for all the hims and hers and theys who disappeared. Another reason I write on this subject is because I kept waiting for someone else to publish it. I desperately wanted to read it. Unfortunately, there is a definite lack of socio-critical work published on the 80s and early 90s AIDS era in fashion. I honestly believe it is because the people who could write it are either dead or too traumatized from living through that time period. The latter was true for me for nearly 30 years. The knowledge gathering that followed was not only personally liberating, but it was also creatively liberating. Unlike my Canadian fashion economy's historical research, I did not have a book deal or end goal for the Lilac Time research, so I was free to handle my subjects in innovative ways. The histories that I write about were so fabulous that I felt it was important to craft a voice that reflected that. Campy, arch at times, academically rigorous certainly, but it also needed to have some swagger and some fire. One of the subject areas I teach here at Seneca is research methods and methodologies, so innovative and creative forms of knowledge creation are always on my radar. My research practice has had a practice-based aspect that involved design and art making from the beginning, and this was the ideal project to synthesize my visual explorations with a more creative expression of my authorial voice. I was off to the rodeo. Rodeo. It is a loaded word, and delightfully so. As I write in the book on page 9, quote, rodeo, the idea of performing on a bucking bronco in a ring, with spectators watching. Rodeo, the expression, this ain't my first rodeo. Been through this. Also, the idea of Rodeo Drive, which is pronounced in the Spanish way, Rodeo, and therefore has a chic connotation, that insider knowledge, the je ne sais quoi that is so very gay. The antithesis is, of course, that scene in Showgirls where Nomi pronounces Versace not with a chi, but with an ace, Versace. Then there is the Reno Gay Rodeo, set up by Phil Ragsdale, who wanted to create a space for the queer community to express themselves openly, and as a way for supposedly straight rodeo people to do something with other people that were like them. 1983 had been the apex of the event, with around 20,000 people, and it was led by Joan Rivers. Who else? Then AIDS hit and decimated the event, even as it was simultaneously decimating the lives and social fabric of gay culture everywhere. Our gay cowboys dismounted and wandered bow-legged out into a hazy desert horizon. They were beckoned and welcomed into an eternal lilac twilight by all who had come before. End quote. Then there is lilac time. Lilac to me is the color of memory, soft, mournful, romantic, and defiantly beautiful. In the language of flowers, lilac represents first love, which felt especially poignant as I wrote about young people whose lives were cut short. Also, there is Walt Whitman's beautiful, complicated, and moving poem, When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, written as an elegy to Abraham Lincoln, and as it was published in 1865, to the enormous losses of the Civil War, which had just ended as well. But lilac time also suggests a specific hour, twilight, that moment between light and dark, beauty and disappearance. That was the mood I wanted to capture, a space suspended between joy and loss, where memory can bloom again with the sweet perfume of a lilac. So Lilac Time at the Rodeo is not just a title, it is a setting, a location, and the emotional geography for the book, a queer liminal space where we can remember our dead, not just with sorrow, but with some glamour, humor, gratitude, and attitude. The time frame of the first Lilac book is the 1960s and 1970s, and these were eras of social expansion and heightened emancipation for gay people. Within the subcultural ghettos of Toronto, San Francisco, New York, London, Paris, Los Angeles, Mexico City, Sydney, Montreal, Milan, there was a new opportunity and freedom afforded to gay people that had never been available before. They ran with it. The world of fashion and design benefited enormously from their ascendant, exuberant expression. Fashion design, acquisition, and display are clear communicators of zeitgeist. Pierre Bourdieu, in his book Distinction, A Social Critique of the Judgment of Taste from 1984, explored how objects as lifestyle signifiers are coveted as a way of communicating a superior social position and a way of what he described as cultural capital. There was also Michel Foucault, who we lost to AIDS, who wrote in Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison from 1975, that the uniform was used to both shape the body and discipline the mind. It is not just uniforms, though. Most garments subtly reshape the body and guide the psyche. In the 1970s, young people were getting loose with liberation. Their cultural capital was of far more hedonistic variety, and they clearly communicated this through the fashions of the times. Satin shirts open to the waist for men, one shoulder draped chiffons for women, everything silky, sliding over the body, in terms revealing then concealing. The communication of disco-era divas and studs was unmistakable. They were out for fun. In and out of their streamlined, body-conscious attire, they visually broadcast the question Rod Stewart raunchily rasped out in the 1978 hit, "Do You Think I'm Sexy?" This was all epitomized by such fashion world beauties as Margot Hemingway. The 70s aesthetic expressed a highly sexualized naturalness. The body was the focus, physical expression was through dance, the venue was the nightclub, and everybody had a pretty amazing time until last call. So first, we really need to talk about Halston. I imagine you have heard of him already. While the Halston legacy has certainly been maligned, it has not been forgotten. In the book, I write about how his media representation was way off from who he was as a designer and as a person. Halston's sleek, minimalist aesthetic, defined by flowing fabrics, clean lines, and a sense of effortless glamour, came to embody the sophisticated, liberated style of the 1970s, reshaping fashion with a distinctly modern, North American elegance. Halston pieces were apparently very easy to wear. New York model and Halstonette Nancy North stated of them, quote, "No zippers, just get in and out over your head," end quote. What they lacked in hanger appeal, they certainly made up for in embodied animation. Unlike the bar suit by Christian Dior that was so architectural and structured that it nearly stood up by itself, for disco-era sirens, you really just needed to toss one of these floaty gowns on, add a strappy evening sandal, an Elsa Peretti cuff, and you were off to the dance floor to get lost in music. If this presentation had a soundtrack, I would be blasting Sister Sledge, Donna Summer, Sylvester, and of course, Chic. Please feel free to listen along to funky disco in your minds. A word Halston himself used to describe his design style was freedom. On page 119 of Lilac Time, I write about his design aesthetic. Quote, "In archival footage, Halston can be seen adjusting the drape of fabric on one of his models. He thoughtfully repositions her into a contrapposto pose during the fitting. The fabric slips away, sheer against skin, revealing a leg, a scapula, and then obscures them again. It was all designed to be moving and migrating across the body, slinky, sexy, physically alluring through motion. This all resulted in a feeling of being naked with your clothes on. How marvelous. I would love to know what that would feel like. He freed the body from the rigidity of overconstructed couture. He freed North American women from the dictates of European designers, and his zeitgeist aligned with that of the social and sexual freedom of the 1970s. At his best, and even during his most dissolute and debauched times, he was consistently extremely good. Halston was pure poetry in motion, and always, always true to his unique quintessence. End quote. Of note, the shoes that Halston Alva Chin, second from the left in the photograph, is wearing look to be the same ones that she later donated to the Costume Institute at the Met. Halston used beautifully draped fabrics that caught the light. Hammered silk satins, charmeuse, gossamer chiffons. The museum at FIT in New York states of the gown on the right, Halston's elegant satin gown was inspired by the idea of wrapping the body with a bath towel and tying it over the breasts. Its structure, of course, is not that simple. An understatement. I well remember from fashion school that bias cut chiffon is a nightmare to work with, as it continues to reshape even as it hangs. You therefore have to rehem it a week or so after it is finished, sometimes more than once. Diaphanous does not correspond with unexacting. Halston's works are technical marvels. According to Fred Dennis, senior curator of costume collections at the museum at FIT, Halston's amazing gowns required patterns that look like Cuisinart blades. Case in point, the American Beauty Rose gown pictured here, which has 8 two-layer pattern pieces that were cut into along their radii and then were paired and joined also at the radii. The pairs were then placed at 4 points on the body, equidistant from one another, before being joined together. Halston's vision, while wholly New York, was readily adopted by the fashionable all across North America. Norma Wildgoose, who donated this gown to our Seneca Fashion Resource Center, was a top Toronto model who worked exclusively for Eaton's department store. Toronto had a famous discotheque at the top of the CN Tower. It was called Sparkles. Perhaps Norma Wildgoose wore this ensemble there as she boogied the night away. What gets lost in the trashy biopics and prurient documentaries concerning Halston is who he really was as a designer, as a creative, and as a person. For the record, Halston's innovations were no less than the creation of a confident, uniquely North American casual chic during the 1970s. This is not hyperbole. He really did it, and it is reflected in museum collections. The Costume Institute at the Met has nearly 250 of his designs, and the museum at FIT, almost 50. Our Seneca Fashion Resource Center has 6. This enduring visibility is unfortunately not true for Scott Barry, who has been effectively erased from the historical record. He should be remembered. He was the most famous Black designer of the 1970s. Scott Barry was a pioneering Black fashion designer whose work in the 60s and 70s marked a bold departure from conventional norms through the use of innovative fabric choices and sleek silhouettes. Emphasizing draping and asymmetry, Barry's aesthetic fused minimalism with sensuality, breaking racial and stylistic barriers in an industry that had long excluded Black designers from the high fashion conversation. His forward-thinking approach helped pave the way for greater inclusivity in American fashion and influenced subsequent generations of designers. Best known for his sensuous, body-hugging jersey dresses, Barry elevated the use of stretch fabrics, previously considered too casual, into the realm of high fashion. His designs celebrated fluidity and movement, often drawing inspiration from dance and the human body. The previous gown was one of several donated to the museum at FIT by the gorgeous Naomi Sims, a close friend of Barry and one of his muses. Sims is widely credited as being the first Black supermodel. In November of 1968, she appeared on the cover of Ladies' Home Journal, the first Black model to be featured on the cover of a mainstream women's magazine in the United States. Here, the creative work of Sims, along with Barry, aligned with and supported the civil rights movement with their respective expressions of Black excellence and elegance. The museum at FIT notes that the donor of this gown, Audrey Smaltz, wore this Barry creation in her role as commentator for the Ebony Fashion Fair in 1971. This touring show of haute couture was established in 1958 and was one of the few high-fashion bookings available for Black models before the 70s. Smaltz is remembered as the fair's most entertaining announcer and accompanied director Eunice Johnson, co-publisher of Ebony and Jet magazines, to Paris to purchase the gorgeous haute couture looks featured in the Ebony Fashion Fair. The tragic loss of Scott Barry, this bright star, was part of a far greater loss to modern fashion design, as Barry was only one of an ascendant generation of Black creatives whose careers and lives were ended by AIDS. There were also Patrick Kelly and Willie Smith, who were phenomenal designers. Then we have Way Bandy, the first celebrity makeup artist. You may not know the name, but I would bet money that you will know his work. Bandy crafted the maquillage of Elizabeth Taylor, Liza, child model Brooke Shields, and all of the famous models of the 70s. His makeup technique focused on a natural face, albeit one that was still very heavily made up and unapologetically glamorous. Of note, Jacqueline Bisset wears a dress by Scott Barry, the designer I just spoke to you about, for this 1973 Vogue cover. Bandy designed the makeup for many iconic shoots of the 1970s, like this Patrick Demarchelier Vogue cover of Farrah Fawcett from 1978. Elizabeth Taylor said of Bandy, quote, "He works like an artist. He mixes colors in the palm of his hand like a painter with a palette," end quote. Bandy was truly gifted as a makeup artist who painted the most beautiful faces, mixing both his own colors as well as foundations, which he kept as closely guarded secrets, bringing them to shoots and antique silver bottles he collected. Bandy created the beauty aesthetic that reflected the sensual, laid-back glamour of the disco era. He favored earth tones and berries, peaches and blushes. He liked to soften his foundation with essential oils so that freckles and the skin tone of the model could be discerned as well. Also of note, Patty Hansen wears another Scott Barry ensemble for this Vogue cover. As was expressed so eloquently by FIT fashion scholar Hilary Davidson, fashion is an expression of the cultural mythologies that dominate an era. I would include the creation and presentation of the contemporaneous face within this myth-making. Bandy was so well known during his heyday that he even appeared alongside frequent collaborator, the photographer Francesco Scavulo, in the 1976 film Lipstick, which starred the troubled beauty Margot Hemingway. The film was stylish but dreadful. I do not, however, recall any other major films that have included cameos by makeup artists. Bandy was extremely successful and famous. After his diagnosis, Bandy did not disclose that he was living with HIV. The stigma was career-destroying, especially for makeup artists because they were in such close contact with the models. Described as kind and private by friends, when queried as to who was his most successful makeover, Bandy replied, "Myself, I guess." He was someone who remade himself completely and made sure his past stayed firmly in the past. Bandy grew up a sensitive and creative little boy in a deeply homophobic home. Like so many others, he escaped to Manhattan, changed his name, and never looked back. His was not an open book, in spite of the generously expressive and detailed, also extremely successful, beauty and self-care publications he authored. A lifelong advocate of alternative healing, in his publications, Bandy extolled organic ingredients, and eschewed harsh chemicals on the face. Avocado and olive oil were used to cleanse the skin. This was visionary. Waybandy also drank bleach and water in an attempt to combat his HIV infection, which definitely was not. In defense of the latter, there were no medical remedies available in the early 1980s. The first, AZT, was introduced in 1987, a year after Waybandy died. Another designer I write about in Lilac Time is Chester Weinberg, a pioneering American fashion designer whose meteoric rise in the 1960s saw him redefine feminine beauty through soft silhouettes, matte jersey innovations, and a uniquely American elegance that challenged the hard-edged European fashion norms of the time. I write about Weinberg in relation to Fire Island, a beautiful summer beach enclave he frequented, as did Truman Capote, so I used Breakfast at Tiffany's as a touchstone throughout the chapter. On page 51 of Lilac Time, I describe a photo of Weinberg as follows, quote, "There is another photograph of Weinberg in the Fashion Makers. Here he sits on a weathered Muskoka chair, Adirondack for the Americans. The wood grain has been raised by the cumulative impact of many seasons of exposure to the elements. An empty glass beside him. It looks like he has just finished the beverage, as it still appears to hold the vestiges of liquid. Deeply tanned, he's wearing khakis and a tight tank top, and his head is cocked to one side, almost as if it is necessary to support his hugest of grins. He is clearly amused about something, as the smile literally spreads from ear to ear. All around him is verdant foliage. I think this photograph is also taken on Fire Island, as I have sat on decks in wild gardens exactly like this one. I can almost hear the sound of wagon wheels on planks, carrying provisions, and friends laughing and catching up as they travel the raised wooden boardwalks, transporting them through the Pines community. The animated chatter passes, and once again, you only hear birdsong." A Brooklyn native and Parsons graduate, Weinberg's artistry was rooted in personal reinvention and cultural transformation. He helped shape an era that brought designers from the back rooms to the front lines of style. After launching his own label in 1966 to immediate acclaim, he designed dresses like this beauty that is shown on the model Marisa Berenson around 1968. Unfortunately, his fashion career was undercut by the disastrous reception of the midi skirt, MIDI, which led to the closure of his business in 1974. Personally, his professional collapse coincided with his coming out as a gay man, marking a new chapter of authenticity and quiet resistance. He went in-house as a designer and was pivotal in the design of Calvin Klein denim. And, dear to my heart, he was also a beloved educator at FIT, where he mentored Isaac Mizrahi, Donna Karan, and Marc Jacobs, among many others. Despite the attempts to downplay Weinberg's significance after his death, Calvin Klein placed a full-page memorial in Women's Wear Daily and endowed a Chester Weinberg Memorial Scholarship Fund at Parsons. For anyone that does not know this, AIDS is an awful and physically degrading way to die. It was not just that so many died young. Many older people died as well. It was the dying hard and painfully. As Susan Sontag states in the book, AIDS and Its Metaphors, quote, "Etymologically, patient means suffer. It is not suffering as such that is most deeply feared, but suffering that degrades," end quote. AIDS was fundamentally degrading as well as disfiguring. And as Sontag observed, unlike polio, first it came for the face. It was therefore highly visible, which in turn created a community of pariahs. For many years, I could not reflect on any of this or read AIDS literature at all. But to support my writing and drawing, there was supplementary reading to be done. I had to do my homework. Susan Sontag, Douglas Crimp, Sarah Schulman, Edmund White, Paula Treichler. I was in lockdown. I had time, and I was finally ready to tally up my losses. Of course, it was not just the men I knew who were dying. Included in this community were folks like genderqueer fashion performance art pioneer Marie Debris and the ethereal Tina Chow. Also, Gia, the lesbian supermodel who was just 26 years old when she died. From the very beginning, there was intravenous injection transmission, heterosexual transmission, as well as hemophiliacs and others who received tainted blood transfusions. The community of pariahs, however, were overwhelmingly represented in the media as gay men. As Paula Treichler states in her book, How to Have a Theory in an Epidemic, Cultural Chronicles of AIDS from 1999, the epic was, quote, cultural and linguistic, as well as biological and biomedical, end quote. The deliberate decision to frame AIDS as a gay plague would have a horrific impact on the epidemic's outcomes. Popular discourse cast AIDS as divine retribution and a just punishment, and the stigma was used to deny resources and research funding that could have suppressed and stemmed the rising tides of the early years of the epidemic. Instead, the epidemic tore through society at large and caused a horrible backlash. There was ignorance, hysteria, rumors, paranoia, violence. People even stopped buying from certain brands because they were afraid of catching AIDS from the garments themselves. Eventually, AIDS resulted in not only the stigmatization and villainization of gay men, but it also shut down the notion of a completely free sexuality for anyone as something that was healthy and should be celebrated. Our all-night Scarlet downtown diva and her suave disco debonair had danced their last dance. So, the genie is out of the bottle and is not going back in. Also, to my great surprise, I was able to find joy in parts of this research. I hope you will as well. I have been presenting the research internationally. I also have published articles in academic journals, most recently an article on Patrick Kelly in Textile Journal of Cloth and Culture, published a few weeks back. My research also led to the creation of the Seneca Fashion Diversity Project, where student researchers and I research amazing fashion stories about non-dominant groups in Canadian society. Hosted on a website supported by the Seneca Library, the Diversity Project focuses on fashion diversity research by student researchers and faculty, all garnered through object-based methodologies centering on garments from our Seneca Fashion Resource Center collection. Research subjects include people of color, our First Nations history, LGBTQ+, and those living with disabilities. One of my honors Bachelor of Design in Interactive Media program students from my Methods and Methodologies class recently wrote a fascinating research article and also created an animated short film on Ayana Maracle, a trans woman from the Haudenosaunee First Nation who was a performance artist, activist, theater director, scholar, and educator. Regarding future developments, Lilac Time at the Rodeo 2, Marie Debris, David Wojnarowicz, and Martin Wong will be launched very soon. If you would like to attend the launch or be added to my mailing list, please send me an email or connect on social media. Thank you to Mark Solomon and the Office of Reconciliation and Inclusion for organizing this amazing event. Thank you to Prouder, the Seneca Polytechnic queer organization for students and faculty. Thank you to Seneca Polytechnic for all of the support, and a special thank you to Dean of FCAD, Kurt Mueller, and Chair of the School of Fashion, Tina Cortese. FCAD and the School of Fashion have always found the resources necessary to support my fashion history research, even during these very challenging times. Finally, thank you to my students who always challenge me and inspire me to bring the most interesting and relevant fashion content to them in our classes. Happy Pride to everyone, and much love to you. I am Dr. Mark Joseph O'Connell, and this was my Seneca Polytechnic Pride Month kickoff lecture, Lilac Time at the Rodeo, Stories of Identity, AIDS, and Fashion.